Worked for 31 years as a structural engineer, bridges mostly, some commercial buildings, a water treatment plant up in Vermont that I'm still proud of. I say that not to brag, but because it matters to the way I think. When I look at something, a structure, a situation, a person, I'm trained to find the load-bearing points, the parts that, if they fail, everything else comes down with them. My daughter's fiancé failed every structural test I had. I just didn't say it out loud soon enough. Her name is Cecily. She's 28, teaches 3rd grade at an elementary school in Flagstaff, Arizona. She loves her kids the way some people love their own children, completely, without condition, without keeping score. She started dating a man named Marcus 2 years ago. He was 32, worked in sales for a software company, drove a truck that was too new for what he probably made, and talked about himself the way people do when they're not sure anyone else will. I noticed those things. I filed them away. I told myself it wasn't my place. His family lived about 40 minutes north of Flagstaff, up near the canyon. His parents, his older brother, and the brother's wife. They had a small cattle operation that wasn't really operational anymore, more of an identity than an income at that point, and a piece of land that had been in the family for 3 generations. The mother ran everything. That was clear from the first dinner. She sat at the head of the table and spoke in a tone that didn't leave room for disagreement. The father smiled and nodded and refilled people's glasses. The brother watched. Cecily thought they were wonderful. I watched them the way I watch any structure under load, waiting to see where the stress shows. They got engaged in October. Marcus proposed at a restaurant in Sedona. Red rocks, sunset, the whole thing. Cecily called me before she called her mother, which I will never forget. She was crying happy. I told her I loved her and I meant every word of it. Whatever I thought about Marcus, I knew what it meant that she called me first. The wedding planning started immediately. The mother had opinions about everything. The venue, the colors, the catering, the guest list. She offered to help coordinate. And what that meant in practice was that she made decisions and informed Cecily afterward. My daughter is not a pushover, but she wanted peace. She kept saying, "It's fine, Dad. It's one day. After the wedding, it'll settle down." I believed her because I wanted to. In January, Marcus's family suggested a ski trip. A long weekend up at a resort about 2 hours north, a place called Elk Ridge, up in the mountains near the Utah border. The idea was to bond before the wedding. Both families spend some time together, get comfortable. My wife passed 6 years ago, so it would have just been me. And honestly, I wasn't planning to go. I've got a bad hip that I've been nursing since a fall on a job site 3 years back. Skiing wasn't something I was up for, but Cecily asked me to come. Not for the skiing, just to be there. So I booked a room. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. The resort was nice enough. Log cabin aesthetic, stone fireplace in the lobby, the kind of place that costs twice what it should because of the view. Marcus's mother had arranged adjacent rooms for their family and taken it upon herself to book Cecily and Marcus a room together without asking me about it. I noticed that. I didn't say anything. The first evening was fine. Dinner in the lodge, a bottle of wine that the mother ordered without asking what anyone else wanted. Conversation that stayed on the surface. The father told a story about a fishing trip. The brother talked about the cattle operation. Marcus talked about his sales numbers. Saturday they all went out to ski. I stayed back. My hip doesn't do slopes anymore, and I'd made peace with that. I sat by the fireplace, read a book, had a good lunch. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman, and she told me she was a front desk clerk at a gas station about 14 miles down the mountain road from the resort. She said a young woman had come in about 20 minutes ago, clearly distressed, asking to use the phone. She said the young woman's name was Cecily, and she was asking her to call me. I remember exactly what I did in that moment. I set down my book. I put both feet on the floor, and I made myself breathe before I spoke. "Is she hurt?" The clerk said she didn't think so, physically, but she was shaking and she'd been crying and she wasn't making a lot of sense. She put Cecily on. "Dad." Her voice was the voice she had when she was 9 years old and something had gone wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. All the adults stripped away. "I'm here. Tell me what happened." She told me. They had all skied down to a lower trail that connected to a scenic overlook. Marcus's brother had suggested it. When they got there, they stopped to take pictures. Marcus stepped away to take a call. He said it was work. While he was on the phone, the rest of the family, the mother, the father, the brother's wife, got into their rental SUV and drove away. They left Cecily there. No cell signal at the overlook. Her phone showed 1 bar and then nothing. She waited 20 minutes thinking it was some kind of miscommunication. Then she started walking. The road was icy. The temperature up there was somewhere around 8 degrees Fahrenheit. She had ski gear on, but no emergency supplies, no hand warmers, nothing you'd want if you had to walk several miles on a mountain road in January. She walked for almost an hour before a couple in a pickup truck stopped and gave her a ride to the gas station. I asked her one question: "Where's Marcus?" She said she didn't know. He hadn't come back from his phone call before they left. I told her to stay inside, stay warm, and that I was coming. I hung up. I sat there for 4 seconds, then I picked up my phone and called my brother-in-law. I should explain who he is. His name is Gerald. He's my late wife's brother. He practiced family law for 22 years and then moved into civil litigation. He's been at the same firm in Phoenix for 16 years. He is not a man who raises his voice. He doesn't need to. He has a way of speaking in depositions and courtrooms that I've watched make grown men sweat through their shirts while he sounds like he's ordering coffee. He's also one of the people I trust most in the world, and he loved Cecily's mother like a sister, which means he loves Cecily like she's his own. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened. I told him where we were, what Cecily had described, the temperature, the location, the fact that she'd had to walk a mountain road alone in winter conditions. I told him the family had driven away in a vehicle they'd rented and that Marcus had been conveniently absent when it happened. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't confront anyone tonight. Get Cecily. Document everything, her condition when you find her, the gas station, the timeline. I'll make some calls." I drove down the mountain and picked her up. She was sitting at a small table near the door with a cup of hot chocolate the clerk had made her. Her face when she saw me walk in, I don't have words for that. She stood up and I put my arms around her and she didn't say anything for a long time. Her hands were still cold when I got her into the car. On the drive back to the resort, she told me the rest. Marcus had come back from his phone call to find her gone. He said later he assumed that she'd gotten a ride back with his family. He hadn't called her. He hadn't tried to find out. He'd skied back to the lodge on his own, had lunch, and was surprised when I showed up with Cecily looking like she'd had the worst hour of her life. That was the word he used. Surprised. The family's version, delivered by the mother over dinner that evening with a smile that I will remember for the rest of my life, was that it had been a miscommunication. She thought Cecily was riding with Marcus. Marcus thought Cecily was with them. These things happen on group trips. She was sorry Cecily had been frightened. Frightened. My daughter walked alone on an icy mountain road in 8-degree weather for close to an hour, and the word the woman chose was frightened. I excused myself from the table before I said something I couldn't take back. I walked to the lobby and I stood by the window, and I looked at the mountains and I thought about load-bearing points. And I thought about what Gerald had said. Document everything. I went back to my room and I wrote down everything Cecily had told me. Times, temperatures, distances, the name of the gas station clerk, the description of the pickup truck that had stopped for her. I took a photograph of the resort's outdoor thermometer. I noted the time. Then I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but will not apologize for. I checked the family's rental vehicle. It was parked in the lot, and I photographed the odometer through the window. I wanted a record of where that car had been. 2 days later, back in Flagstaff, Gerald called me. He had done what he does. He had looked into the family. What he found wasn't criminal history. It was pattern. The cattle operation had been in financial trouble for over a year, liens on equipment, a payment in arrears on a small business loan. The father had a civil judgment against him from a contractor dispute 3 years prior. The mother had been named in a lawsuit involving a property boundary disagreement with a neighbor that had settled quietly. And then Gerald told me about the prenuptial agreement. Marcus's mother had been pushing, through Marcus, for a prenup that would protect certain family assets in the event of divorce. This had been a quiet negotiation happening between Marcus and Cecily for 2 months. Cecily hadn't told me because she didn't want me to worry. The prenup, as drafted, included language that would have required Cecily to forfeit any claim to shared marital property in the event the marriage ended within 5 years. And it included a clause that the family's legal team had inserted that was, in Gerald's words, the kind of language you put in a document when you're not planning for the marriage to last. He explained the rest of it to me slowly and clearly, the way he explains things to clients. The family had debt, Marcus stood to inherit land that, while not currently profitable, sat on ground that a regional developer had been trying to acquire for 2 years. If Marcus married someone without independent financial resources and without legal sophistication, and if that marriage ended on terms they controlled, they were in a much stronger position to manage what happened to that inheritance. Cecily, on a teacher's salary, without a lawyer reviewing her prenup, was exactly the profile they wanted. Leaving her on that mountain wasn't a miscommunication. It was a message. Gerald filed a civil suit for negligent infliction of emotional distress and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He named the mother, the father, and the brother. He also sent a letter to Marcus's employer, not making accusations, simply noting that a civil action had been filed and providing the documentation we had, including the temperature records and the timeline. During the discovery phase, Gerald's team requested the family's phone records. What they found was a group text thread. The 3 of them, the mother, father, and brother, had been communicating during the trip. On the afternoon of the incident, there were messages coordinating their departure from the overlook. One message, sent by the brother to the group, said, "She's at the scenic stop. Marcus is on his call. Now's a good time to head back." The mother's response, "Understood." That was the end of the argument about miscommunication. Marcus showed me that text thread himself, actually. He'd asked Gerald for a copy during a conversation they had without attorneys. He came to my house on a Tuesday evening. He sat at my kitchen table, and he looked at me and he said that he hadn't known. He said his family had told him it was an accident, and he had chosen to believe them because it was easier than the alternative. I listened to him. I didn't say much. I told him that what he chose to believe was his business, but that what he chose to do next would define him. He asked what I meant. I told him that the woman he was engaged to had walked alone on a frozen road for an hour in January because his family had coordinated it, and that his response to that information would tell her everything she needed to know about whether she could spend her life with him. He left without giving me an answer. The civil case was settled before trial. The settlement terms are confidential, which Gerald advised and I agreed to. But I'll say this, Cecily no longer has to worry about her student loans, and she was able to put a down payment on a house in a neighborhood she loves. She teaches her 3rd graders every morning, and she calls me on Sundays, and she sounds most of the time like herself again. The judge in the matter made several pointed remarks during a pre-trial hearing about the nature of the incident that I suspect contributed significantly to the family's decision to settle. Gerald told me later that the opposing counsel had been visibly uncomfortable by the end of that hearing. I imagine that the text message had something to do with that. Marcus did not attend the settlement proceedings. He and Cecily had ended their engagement 6 weeks after the trip. She made that decision herself, in her own time, in her own way. She didn't ask for my opinion, and I didn't offer it. The last thing she said to me about him was that, when she'd finally asked him directly whether he had known what his family was planning, he had looked out the window instead of at her. That was enough of an answer for both of us. I've thought a lot since then about the nature of hidden damage. In structural engineering, there's a failure mode we talk about called slow fracture. It's different from sudden collapse. In slow fracture, the damage accumulates over time. Stress cycles, microscopic cracks, material fatigue, and the structure looks fine from the outside. It passes visual inspection. It holds its load day after day. And then one day the wrong force is applied at the wrong moment and it doesn't hold anymore. And when investigators go back and look at the failure site, the evidence of the damage was always there. They just weren't looking in the right places. That family had been fracturing for a long time before my daughter walked into their orbit. The debt, the pattern of behavior, the way the mother controlled every conversation, the way the father deferred to her in a way that had stopped being love and become something else. All of it was the slow fracture presenting itself if you knew how to look. Marcus was the structure that looked stable. Cecily got out before the load came down. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had said something earlier about what I observed. I wish I had encouraged Cecily to have a lawyer review the prenup from the beginning instead of trusting that Marcus would protect her interests. I wish I had understood sooner that my job wasn't to let her make her own mistakes without interference. My job was to make sure she had the information she needed to make her own decisions. Those are different things, and I got them confused. What I got right was calling Gerald. What I got right was writing everything down. What I got right was standing in that kitchen and telling Marcus Holloway the truth about what it meant to be the kind of man who looks out the window when someone asks him a direct question. Cecily painted her new living room a color she calls terracotta, but looks orange to me. She has a shelf of books above her fireplace and a photograph of her mother on the mantel and a cat named Professor that tolerates me sitting in the good chair. She's going to be fine. She was always going to be fine. She just needed the people who loved her to make sure the structure around her was strong enough to hold while she found her footing again. That's what fathers are for. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since all of this happened. Not in any abstract way. In the very concrete, engineering way my brain defaults to when I'm trying to make sense of something. Every failure has an origin point. Every collapse has a sequence. And when you trace it back far enough, you almost always find that the outcome was written long before the moment it became visible. That family made choices, small ones first, then larger ones, each one building on the last the way load accumulates on a structure that was never rated for what it was being asked to carry. The debt they didn't address. The control they normalized. The prenup language they thought was clever. And then finally a frozen mountain road and a text message that said, "Now's a good time to head back." Each choice followed from the one before it. The consequences followed from all of them. That's what I mean when I say there's nothing mysterious about what happened. The Holloways didn't fail because of bad luck. They failed because of who they had chosen, over years, to become. Cecily held up through all of it in a way that I still think about. She was the one who walked that road. She was the one who sat at my kitchen table and made her own decision about Marcus without asking me to make it for her. She was the one who showed up to teach her third graders every morning while a civil case worked its way through the system and her life was quietly being rebuilt around her. That's not something I gave her. That's something she built in herself, one ordinary day at a time, long before any of this happened. Resilience doesn't appear when you need it. It's already there, or it isn't. And if it's there, it's because you've been building it without knowing you were. What I gave her, what I hope I gave her, was the capacity to think clearly under pressure. To ask the right questions. To understand that being deceived is not the same as being foolish, and that the right response to being wronged is not fury, but precision. Gerald didn't win that case by being angry. He won it by being meticulous. There's a lesson in that about what intelligence actually looks like when it matters. It doesn't look like the loudest voice in the room. It looks like the person who already wrote everything down. I made mistakes in this. I saw things early that I didn't act on because I told myself it wasn't my place. I watched a mother control every dinner conversation and I filed it away instead of saying something. I let Cecily navigate a prenup negotiation without making sure she had her own counsel. Those were failures of mine, and I own them. But I also know that sitting in regret about what I should have done is its own kind of indulgence. What matters is what you do with the understanding once you have it. What I understand now is that protecting someone you love doesn't mean shielding them from difficulty. It means making sure they have the tools, the information, and the support structure to face difficulty without being destroyed by it. Cecily wasn't destroyed. She's in her terracotta living room with her books and her cat and her photograph of her mother, and she's building a life on ground that belongs to her. The Holloways wanted that ground. They thought they'd found a way to take it. They hadn't counted on Gerald. They hadn't counted on me, and most of all, they hadn't counted on her.